Hi, everyone. So great to have you here, those in the room, those watching on live stream, and those watching the recording. My name is Hannah Kopakin. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am so excited to be celebrating Jewish Heritage Month here with Micah Siva. And to have you here, we're thrilled. Micah is a trained chef, a registered dietitian, an unbelievably good food blogger and photographer, and has recently just released her first cookbook, Nosh. So thrilled to have her here. Yeah, claps all around. Amazing. So Mike and I are going to talk for a little bit about the book, your career. We'll invite up Chef Randy from our team afterwards to do a bit of a demo of one of your recipes, and then we'll invite Q&A from those in the room and those on live stream. So that's kind of the game plan. You ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
Amazing. So my first question is just inspiration for the book, story behind the book, and yeah, let us know.
How it came to be.
Yes.
So I became vegetarian around 12. Like any good Jewish girl, I had stomach problems. I didn't know what to do with them. And so my thought was maybe I'll just stop eating meat. And first, my parents were incredibly disappointed, of course. And then they asked me where I was going to get my protein. And then they hired a dietitian who taught us how to eat vegetarian food. But at that point, my mom also said, you're on your own for making your own dinner at this point. So I was 12. I wasn't making food like this. I was probably eating mac and cheese and eggs and toast most nights. But I always felt a little left out at the holidays because my grandparents didn't really understand why I didn't want to eat their meat. I come from a very food-heavy family where if you don't eat it, it means you don't love me. And there was a lot of guilt associated with it. And if you bring your own food, it also means you don't love me. So every holiday I'd eat mashed potatoes and an iceberg lettuce salad at my grandmother's house. Delicious, very filling, incredibly nutritious. And I always wished that there was something for me at a holiday table. And it only was until in the past 10 years or so where I've had to make my own family meals and family holidays and share my Jewish food and love for Jewish food with others outside of my parents' house, that I realized that was such a big part of my faith and community that I was missing. And so I saw all these vegetarian and vegan ethnic cuisine cookbooks coming out. You have Korean vegan, Indian vegan. I just got a really fabulous vegetarian Turkish book. And I didn't see a vegetarian Jewish book. So I figured, why not? And I mean, it wasn't that simple. It took a lot of time, but I just felt like there was a gap missing. And I wish that I had this book as a 12-year-old.
Yeah, I feel like any good technical problem, it's like you see that there's an opportunity, right? It's very relatable. I became a vegetarian when I was 9 for different reasons. But similarly, my family was like, she'll do it for 3 weeks. It won't be that big of an issue. And here we are. I won't tell you how old I am, but many years later. So I'm thrilled just personally to have this book. And the room already smells amazing from the recipe you're going to cook. So that's awesome. Like I am target demographic, which is amazing. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So in North America, Jewish comfort food, kind of to what you were talking about often, and for folks in the room or other Jews watching, right? It has a similar idea. It's brisket, it's chicken noodle soup, it's pastrami sandwiches. So how did you think about like re-envisioning these dishes that are very meat heavy, to your point, with a plant-based lens?
So I think what's important to recognize is when we're eating a lot of these foods, it's not necessarily the food itself, but it's the memory that it comes along with. So maybe it's eating brisket at Hanukkah or having chicken matzo ball soup for Passover when you're sick. And so recreating some of the flavor profiles so that you can relive some of those memories is really how I went about it. And like you said, in North America, so much of Jewish food is meat heavy, but that's just one sect of Jewish cuisine. And so being able to look across the diaspora, because Jews have found themselves in all corners of the world, and what are foods that they're eating. And the same token, Jewish food isn't just deli food. And I think that that's a big misconception, especially for someone who hasn't experienced it themselves. And Jewish food really just means that you're not eating non-kosher things. So you're not eating pork or shellfish or meat and milk together. So by default, when you look at it that way, a lot of Jewish dishes are already vegetarian. I think that Jewish people are kind of like the original dairy-free people because we can't have meat and milk together. So we were also just making dairy-ish things out of hydrogenated oils for many, many years before it got a little bit more nutritious. So I think that there's ways to replicate the meat dishes, but then there's also ways to explore Jewish food as a wider cuisine than focusing on the meat ones and seeing how can we put ourselves back at that table to relive those memories.
Yeah, I love that. Like any cuisine, there's so much more diversity than I think like North America or any country sells us on, right?
Totally.
Going a little off script, because I want to ask a question about something you just said about recreating taste profiles. Like, what does that process entail? Like, what does that mean to recreate, like think about recreating a taste profile of meat?
Yeah, so when we're thinking of recreating meat, in the book, I didn't want to use any meat alternatives like fake chicken or beef or vegan eggs or anything like that, because A, they're not always widely accessible. B, they might not be in business tomorrow. We don't know.
Yeah.
And they don't always make us feel the best, or at least that was me personally. I have to test everything, so I didn't want to eat them all the time. But you're looking at textures, or I'm looking at texture as the first thing. So what's the texture of, we're making a pastrami sandwich today. There's a vegan brisket recipe, a vegan whitefish salad recipe. So I'm looking for things that can kind of replicate those textures somewhat. And then I'm looking at, I really looked at my grandmother's cookbook that I inherited from her with all the notes in the margins to say, what was in her brisket marinade and how can I make that vegetarian, but then also add some spices and ingredients to make a little bit more umami flavor present in there, because when you're using meat, it comes naturally. When you're not, unless you're using mushrooms, you have to build those flavors differently. So it takes a lot of first guesswork and research and then a lot of testing. So some of the ingredients that I use to build some of those flavors are things like soy sauce or tamari, miso, liquid smoke, different roasting methods, and just looking for ways to get that memory through different ingredients. So a pastrami sandwich with that red meat, I'm using beets instead to color it, and then using a blend of spices that are familiar because that's what you would use in a pastrami sandwich anyways.
Yeah, cool. I'm going to also just not get to any of the questions I have written down here. So can you talk more about the R&D part that you were just talking about? Like, walk us through how you research, how you develop, how you test that. Like, is it in your home kitchen? Is it by yourself? Who tells you if you're on the right track?
So everything is done in my home kitchen. And I'm lucky that we have a relatively good kitchen here in San Francisco, which is rare, but that's the only reason we live where we do.
Relatable for people.
Yeah, relatable. One day we'll upgrade, but everything is done in our home kitchen. I come up with a concept and then I write out different ways that I might approach the concept. So maybe I'm going to try it with celery root. Maybe I'll try it with tofu. Maybe I'll try it with a mushroom. And I make myself a roadmap of what I'm going to try that day. I'll take furious notes. I'll taste it myself. My husband's obviously a taste tester. I'm working on my son being a taste tester. Currently, he likes bananas. So we'll get here. But then I have people in the area who I give food to. My neighbors also love me. Then for the book, I also had a team of 60 testers. So once I was happy with a recipe, I then sent it to a tester who then sent me feedback on a Google form. And then I would rework the recipe based on that. I would send it back to them to retest, and then to my team of 5 preferred testers. They didn't know that, but they just got more recipes than anyone else. And then I would test
they were better at.
They were better. And then I would test it again, and I'd go through that cycle until everyone was happy with it. And when you're testing, you're testing for taste, but you're also testing to make sure that it's doable for someone at home, that it's easy to find the ingredients, that the instructions are clear, that the salting is okay, and in case there's a misstep. And of course, this is all done before it gets to my editor. Then my editor makes sure that it's readable and clear for the reader as well. So it's a long process. I took 6 months off of work to work on it. Then I did it part-time while I worked so I could pay rent.
Yeah,
so
that is important.
Yeah, rent was important, but it was a long process and probably the most humbling thing I've ever done. Because sometimes I thought something was killer, but turns out my tester wasn't as into it. So you have to please as many people as you can, which is truly impossible.
Well, I'm thrilled to be up here with you in hopes that that gets me on that list for the next cookbook.
You have to prove yourself.
Okay. I'm working on it. Okay, so you talked briefly about your grandmother, and you talk about two of your grandmothers in the book, Eva and Muriel. And I'm curious about how those women kind of nurtured your love of food and talking a bit more about that.
Yeah, so my grandmother, Eva, my mom's mom, was an amazing cook. She was the life of the house. She was incredible. She was such a firecracker, and she always was wearing an apron with red lipstick and like pearls, like strands and strands of pearls while she was cooking. And so as a kid, she used to live in Vancouver. If you can't tell, I'm Canadian. It comes out. But we'd go to Vancouver to visit my grandmother, just my sister and I, every summer. So every summer we'd spend an entire day picking raspberries. Then she taught us how to make raspberry jam. And then the next day we'd make little thimble cookies with our raspberry jam, and we'd make chicken soup together. We'd make brisket together. Truly everything with her was food-based. So she was the quintessential, if you don't eat until you are rolling out of the house, it means you don't love me anymore. And that's unacceptable. And when I first went to culinary school, it meant that I also dropped out of college. And when I told her that, she was the most supportive. She was such a huge inspiration for me, just following what I was passionate about. And this book is truly almost like a love letter to my grandmother. She passed in 2018, and that was when I rediscovered my love of Jewish food and why it was important to make it vegetarian, because I was living in the UK. She was in Western Canada when she passed, and I couldn't go back for her burial. And I coped by making food that she would have made with me. My other grandmother, Muriel, less of a cook, could make two things, but still just keeping those traditions alive for her. And her very few recipes that she could make, her mandel bread or kamishbrot, which are like little biscottis, are in the book. And then she was Romanian, so she'd always make us mamaliga, which is like a Romanian polenta. So she was the sassier side of the bubby spectrum and less of the nurturing cooking side. There's no chance she'll watch this, and I'm sorry, I love you, but she knows. So they definitely played a big role, and I know that that's such a big part of the Jewish culture, as well as passing down the recipes through and stories through them. So that was important to include both of them.
I love that it really comes through, both in like reading the book myself, which many of you will get to do, but also it's very relatable. Like so many, to your point earlier, I don't know if it was on the live stream when we were chatting earlier, so much of cooking is about the memories with the people we make it with. And so that really shows up in your book. I love that. Okay, there's so many things I want to cover. I also do want to cover that your writing skills also span other genres, and you have a children's book as well, which is not the main feature today, but is so cool. So I want to make sure we touch on it. Yeah. It's behind me here. It's called 1, 2, 3 Nosh with me. And so tell us a little bit about that, kind of the inspiration for that and what that book is about. And I believe it is your actual dog on the cover.
That's our dog, Buckwheat. And so that actually started as a COVID project. My sister was pregnant, and my husband and I were looking for a gift for my then-to-be niece, and we wanted a Jewish book, but we didn't want one that was overtly Jewish. We wanted one that was culturally Jewish, because that's how my sister, I guess, aligns to Judaism. And we couldn't find the one that was, I obviously wanted one food focused because I'm me, and we couldn't find one. So it started as a COVID project between my husband and I. Then it I guess not spiral, that sounds negative, but it turned into something bigger. And it's been so much fun to do kids events and kids classes as well through it. And now that I have a son, it means a lot more than it did when I was doing it for my niece. So now the story is that we did it for him instead of my niece, of course. But it's a counting book, 1 through 10, Jewish, all about Jewish foods. Buckwheat has indeed eaten all of the Jewish foods off of the table at one point. And then
one of your favorite testers, I presume.
Don't even get me started. I made 200 latkes for the shoot, and he ate all but 5. So the Hanukkah spread has 5 latkes because he ate them all. And we were out of potatoes and patience. And so it was, I'm still mad. Yeah.
I mean, he is a dog. I love that. Okay, jumping around, I feel like it wouldn't be a Google talk if we didn't talk about AI. So I'm curious, how does it impact, and how does it impact recipe development? How are you seeing that show up in your world?
So AI is a big conversation among recipe developers, especially because everything we do is so hands-on and we have to physically actually taste something and touch it with our hands. And I think AI is really great for recipe developers if you have context and know what you're doing. I think if I'm stuck on an idea, I might, maybe not for work, but when I'm at home, I can ask AI to give me some ideas. But again, AI doesn't have taste buds. They don't work in the kitchen. Don't say that. That's terrifying. They don't have taste buds as far as I know. I don't know. God, I hope not. That's a terrifying thought. But you still need that human touch when it comes to food. And like we talked about before, the memories of cooking with someone and the love that's poured into food, I think is so important. And that comes out and comes across when you're eating and when someone's sharing a meal with you. So I think AI has been very helpful for me in my business because I do this as I write recipes as a freelancer and contractor. So when there's an email I'm afraid to send, I rely on AI very heavily to make me sound more serious and to write an email I'm afraid of sending and to also help with business activities. So I think as a small business owner, AI is the best. When it comes to recipe developing, we're all kind of touch and go with it because A, we still want a job, and B, we also know that there is value to have an actual human doing this and having a skilled hands-on worker to be able to teach people.
Yeah, I just, when you said that, pictured like you not being here and me like talking to, and that wasn't going to be fun. Yeah. So, and I think that's similar to how probably a lot of us feel too, right? Like we all are figuring out what parts of our job it works for. Mine is also a lot of like finessing emails and other things it like does a very terrible job at, the human parts of my job. So I totally, very different jobs and yet still a similar kind of thing. Okay, so let's talk about, plant-based. We've mentioned that. We've talked about it. The recipe today will be plant-based. Can you give some guidance to people who are trying to be flexitarian, maybe cut down on meat consumption? I mean, one good thing is to like buy the book and do these recipes, but can you just talk more about that as someone who's been this, chosen to be a vegetarian for so long in your life and focused on this in your work?
So when it comes to being plant-based, you don't have to be vegetarian at all. I think that this book is just as important for a meat lover to buy. I think we can all agree that most of us could eat more vegetables in their day. That's a pretty blanket statement that I find. Yeah, we have many
and some skepticism.
Yeah, but most of us could benefit from a few more vegetables. And so when I put my dietitian hat back on from many moons ago, I think that increasing our vegetables and seeing meat as a side dish when we're cooking is one great way to start. So we don't necessarily need to center our meal around meat or a brisket. You can still have your brisket. You do you. I'm not the boss of you. You're all adults. You all made it this far. And it feels quite far to me. Like you did great. You're here. But you can also highlight how delicious and versatile vegetables can be and maybe shine a little bit more light on them during the day. And just start with one meal a week, really. You don't have to go all in. Again, you're the captain of your own ship. You do you, but maybe just try to eat one or two more vegetables a week. So baby steps. I'm all about baby steps. I'd rather you do that forever than be vegan for a week and then give it up forever. So,
like most of my friends in high school. Exactly. Cool. So we are about to finish up, sadly, our part of it to get you and Randy demoing, but I want to do a quick round of like fast facts, one or the other. Okay. So I'm going to read off two things. You're going to tell me what your preference is. Okay. You can add a little color if you want. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Sweet or savory?
Savory.
Oh, that was quick. Okay. I did send these to her in advance.
I didn't even read them.
Okay, well, there you go.
I was like, I trust her.
Okay, so savory. I agree. Yes. Spicy or mild?
Medium.
That's not an option. Okay.
Well, I chose it.
Medium, cool. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
All right. How do you take it?
Black.
All right, easy. Me too. Baking or grilling?
Baking.
You seemed conflicted.
They don't usually get lumped together, so I wasn't really sure.
I did ask AI to give me these examples. I'm not going to lie.
They don't know. Know.
Okay. Fork or spoon?
Fork?
There's no right answer. I don't know. Okay, food as art or food as nourishment?
Nourishment.
Cooking shows or cooking competitions?
I'm a chopped junkie. I watch it in the background when I clean.
I like it.
Yeah.
Breakfast for dinner or dinner for breakfast?
Breakfast for dinner.
Great. Comfort food or fine dining?
Comfort.
Yeah, I think that comes through in your book. And cooking for others or dining out?
Cooking for others.
Yeah, you still like to do it. You're not like, okay, cool. Well, that was so fun. I'm going to be back on in a bit for Q&A. So again, folks in the room and on live stream, please send us and start thinking about your questions. But I do want to invite up Chef Randy, our amazing chef from Google, who is going to walk through recipe with you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Very great to get to know you. And we're going to get to know you a little bit more through food. So we chose this recipe. I think this is one of the standout recipes that you pointed out in your book, the pastrami sandwich. Speaking of that, do you have any early memories of eating pastrami with your family?
Yeah, so I grew up in Calgary, Canada, and there was really only 1 or 2 Jewish delis. And my Zeta, my grandfather, loved to go with my dad. And my last memory of eating pastrami, because of course I gave up meat a while ago, was that we went to the deli and we were sitting in the booth and we were all eating our pastrami sandwiches. We all have to split 2 between the 3 of us because they're this big. And I just remember pastrami juices dripping everywhere. You don't feel great. Then afterwards, I told him this before, that's why he's laughing. The punchline comes. Then we went to the World War II Museum in Calgary, and I remember hating it. It wasn't for me. And then my Zeta had a heart attack. And that was the last time I ate pastrami. He was fine. He lived another 15 plus years. He just had a quadruple bypass after that. And he didn't really eat pastrami anymore. So that was my memory last of eating a pastrami sandwich.
Yeah, after that, I would go to the vegetarian option as well. So we chose this recipe because I thought this was super, super unique. And we're making the star of the dish here, celeriac. And for those who don't know what celeriac is, it's the most ugly vegetable in the world, with all the roots and everything intact. Yes. Is there any best recommendations for usage or how to prep it?
Yeah, so when you're choosing a celeriac or celery root, you might find it in the store. You want to make sure it feels heavy for its size. As they get older, they lose some of their water content and the inside can get a little bit holy. So you might end up with some, gaps in your celeriac. It's totally safe to eat. It's just nice to have a really plump one, if we can call it plump. And when you're preparing it, just make sure you give it a really, really good scrub because it has all these knobby little bits and hairs. Again, the ugliest vegetable in the world. I think it looks like in Harry Potter, the mandrake when it comes out of the pot screaming because it's so ugly. You want to give it a really good wash and scrub, and many dishes will have you peel it. It's very common to find this in a soup, pureed in a soup or roasted. We both like to keep the skins on. We have this in common for flavor, texture, and of course nutrition, and because it's kind of a pain to peel. Definitely. So any shortcut we can take, I think, is best, and it's typically found with your potatoes.
Awesome. So the first step in this recipe is basically taking the celeriac and then roasting it with oil, salt, pepper, right?
Yes.
So over here is the version that we have right out of the oven after it's been roasted in oil, salt, pepper.
Even uglier.
It's even uglier, yes.
Who knew?
So what's the next process that we want to do after that?
So the next step, we roast it so that we really get this skin on there. I love the texture of it. And so the next step is that we want to thinly slice it as if we were going to do with a piece of meat. So here I am on my tippy toes, but we just
the counter height's made for me.
I know, yeah. Slice as thin as we can. And this is going to be our slices of meat.
And again, leaving the outside skin also creates a different texture along with this, almost kind of like a smoked meat.
Exactly. Because if you think of pastrami, it's typically rubbed with spices. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to maintain that textural element of the edges of the meat that are covered in spices. So you can see that it has those gaps in it, but it's totally safe to eat. And it's just fine. It's not particularly in season right now. And it's being a little bit...
Yeah. You get towards the end and then
funky
it gets a little
at the end.
Funky.
So we use these slices as our sandwich slices. And what we do next is we add it to a pan and we make a marinade.
All right, so we're going to bring out the components of the marinade. Speaking of the marinade, in pastrami, what exactly are the flavors that make this taste so much like pastrami?
So with pastrami, it's really about the spices. So you have allspice and coriander, garlic, onion, Dijon mustard, and of course salt. I add liquid smoke to this. Liquid smoke and soy sauce help to give it a bit of that umami flavor. You'll find in the book that I use liquid smoke relatively frequently because we want to be able to replicate some of that smokiness and meaty flavor. Liquid smoke is a natural product. And once you buy a little jar, it lasts you a long time because a little bit goes a long way. And so for this, we're going to add a beet. I just use a raw beet that I peel. If I'm feeling lazy, I don't even peel it because you're going to blend it anyways. But
yeah, and you get a lot of the nutrition from the skin.
Exactly. So soy sauce or tamari. This is our liquid smoke that I smell like.
Yeah, that's gonna
stay. Yeah. A little bit of maple syrup, some Dijon mustard.
All right.
Perfect.
Yeah, that liquid smoke is kind of one of the main components that I smell when really reminds me of pastrami.
Yeah. Salt, garlic, and onion powder. And then the coriander and the allspice is really what helps to make this pastrami tasting, because if you think of the spices that you put on the outside of a pastrami, it is coriander, allspice, and then a whole lot of black pepper as well.
Amazing.
Then some oil and water. Somehow I chose to wear white on a day that we're blending beets, but
that's always a risk we're willing to take.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
So it's going to get a little bit noisy in here when we turn on the blender, and we're going to get all ready for that. And we got our plunger just in case we need it.
Are you ready?
I'm ready. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Not so noisy.
No, it's not too bad.
All right. And then the idea behind blending it, you want to kind of start slower and then build up the speed afterwards. Otherwise, you kind of just, you can risk having everything jostle to the top.
Perfect.
Awesome. So we have our marinade ready. So are you just going to pour this right over the top of the celery?
I am, yes. So this recipe is a lot of simple steps that take a little bit of waiting time. So we roast the celeriac first for 2 hours, and then we wait for it to cool so we can slice it. And then we marinate it for up to 24 hours, and then we bake it again. So it's a lot of steps that aren't difficult. It's a lot of downtime. So keeping that in mind also, if you're going to make this at home is important, because it's not ready for dinner tonight.
So you want to spread it out over the celeriac and then ensure that it's well coated.
Yes.
So what's the minimum amount of time and maximum amount of time that you want to leave this in the marinade?
So I would do this for a minimum of 2 hours, a maximum of up to 48 hours. So if you forget it in the fridge, it's okay. I'll typically split this up over a couple of days. So one night while I'm making dinner, I'll just put the celeriac to roast in the oven for that initial 2 hours. Then the next day I might do the marinade in the morning, cook it at night, or let it sit for another day. And I'll often double this as well because it freezes really well. So you can just freeze the slices, and I have a little baggie of them in the freezer, and we'll take them out for.
That's amazing.
Rubens all the time.
This is going to give us that beautiful pastrami pink color. So we're going to put this in the fridge, let that kind of go overnight, and then this is kind of what it looks like afterwards, right here. And then from this point, what do we want to do to it now?
So from this point, so you'll see the beet kind of changes color. As it sits, it was a little bit more red, and it turns almost more purple-ish as it sits. But at this point, all you do is you bake it for another 30 minutes, and that's going to help dry some of it out. I'll typically salt it again because I'm a savory, salty girl. I'll put some more coriander and allspice on it, which I have in the recipe as well. And then I roast it until it's relatively dry, and then it's ready to use. So I was very happy that you guys chose this one because Chef Randy and his team prepared all of it. So it's a nice treat.
I was super eager with this recipe. I mean, just being able to taste some of this beforehand was mind-blowing, that how close of a flavor that you got from pastrami, and then the texture from roasting this also creates that great bite to it. So I think this is such an amazing recipe. There are a lot of steps involved in this recipe. Is there any things that you can do to shorten the process or to speed up or make it feel like you're not doing so much all at once?
So that's when I start to spread it out over a couple of days. Honestly, a lot of the steps are important to make sure that you still have that textural part, especially the roasting in advance helps you get that. So my biggest tip for this is to reduce the time to marinate. And then you can also, instead of using full beets, just use a beet juice and mix everything instead of a blender, just in a bowl, and then marinate it in that as well. It might impact the color a little. It might not be quite as bright, but again, once you cook it, it's not like it's that vibrant anymore. It looks as beautiful as pastrami and celeriac. Like pastrami and celeriac had a baby, so it's not like we're going for looks here. We're really just going for the taste. So really reducing the marinating time, I think, would be our best bet, or just see it as a project.
Yeah, and then you mentioned freezing this to really kind of hold it. How long does it freeze for? Is it?
I've kept it in the freezer for up to 6 months.
Okay, so that's after it's been roasted?
Right at this stage, I'll put it into little sections of what I freeze everything in portions, so a portion for 2 of us, and then I'll just take them out of that little baggie and make it ourselves. I was telling Chef Randy before that we like to make it into little Reuben quesadillas.
I was willing to bring out the tortillas.
Yeah, but, really, I know. So I'll freeze it because, again, it's just me and my husband eating at home. My son is still in bananas.
Still on bananas. All right. So now we're going to talk about the components of assembling the sandwich and what you want to do to make the sandwich. So why don't you go ahead and walk us through that? Yep. We got a couple of different things out here for you. So yeah.
So I'm using rye bread, of course. Any good deli sandwich worth its weight is on rye. And then Chef Randy prepared what do you call this?
This is a Russian dressing.
This is
our style Russian dressing, not your traditional.
Yeah, we were comparing notes on Russian dressing before, and I realized I make my bubby's Russian dressing, like very classic with relish. This sounds much better. I'm excited for this one. So I always put that on, but you can also buy like secret sauce. I'll typically buy the Sir Kensington's one if you eat mayonnaise. So I'll typically have that already in the fridge. And then you cannot have pastrami without kraut. But first, we're going to do vegan cheese first.
Yes.
Questionable melting capabilities on vegan cheese. So if you do eat cheese, I recommend Swiss. We don't know. We don't know what this is going to melt like.
It's ideally going to melt similar to mozzarella, ideally. But, again, it's always a shot in the dark.
It is. It really is. And then I like to pile mine very high with pastrami. We've got 4 little slices here.
Well, make it a little bit thinner,
Yeah,
just for my diet.
That's okay. No one goes to the World War II Museum after this. That's for sure. I'm going to scar all of you with that. And then we've got our sauerkraut. And when I'm making this sandwich, especially because this is so much lighter than a meat sandwich, I am very heavy-handed with the oil because I kind of like that crispy greasiness on my sandwich personally. But
we're all about the nice crispy greasiness.
Then I like some more sauce again.
That's the perfect way to do it.
You cannot have too much sauce. Sometimes I'll even layer more cheese.
So it makes like a cheese envelope. Here.
But we will move this over. You can also spread the outside of your sandwich with mayonnaise as well, which makes a really nice crust, but I'll spare you.
All right. Yeah, so putting your dietitian hat on, I've noticed that, the usage of sauerkraut is actually really, really great for us as far as a probiotic goes. So it contains quite a bit of good nutrients and good bacteria, good other things in there. Is there any other unique benefits about like celery root or celeriac?
Celeriac, it's really a good source of fiber and vitamin C, and that's more or less it. And delicious. If you've never tried it, it's like a mild, sweet, somewhat celery-ish flavor. So there's the only issue with this sandwich, I'll say, that makes it sound negative, but there is no source of protein in it.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the recipes that were vegetable based, I did try to make a source of vegetarian protein added in there. This one doesn't have it. This one's just delicious. So if you're looking for a protein addition, I've also had good luck making this, thank you, with tofu in addition to it. So you can even use this marinade for tofu, and that's actually a great way to reduce the amount of steps. Is just thinly slice extra firm tofu, let it marinate overnight, and then bake it from that. So that's one way to make this a little bit more protein heavy as well. Or you can serve it with like bean salad, or just have beans on the side. Do you again, or have chicken on the side. I don't care.
That's amazing.
Again, not the boss of you. So only of my husband's eating am I the boss of. And at home, I also even like to take a lid and kind of smash it down, which we could even do with a plate. But I have a little sandwich press at home because
that makes sense. If we do a little bit of a lid, it'll also help steam and melt the cheese in there.
Mm-hmm.
I think Eric's gone to the back to just grab us a quick lid,
perfect.
so we can do that. I did lower the temperature so we didn't burn the other side.
Exactly.
That's a really great technique when doing these sandwiches. Oftentimes, I get the pan really hot at the beginning, and then I lower the temperature on the flip. That way, it kind of just mellows out, and then it has more time to melt the cheese. Hopefully the cheese melts.
We will see.
While that is going in and melting the cheese and kind of toasting up the rest of the way, we are going back to the book Nosh. Out of that book, there's countless recipes in there that I just was super excited about. What are some other recipes that you thought would be really great for everyone, or that you want everyone to know about?
So I think with the book, I really tried to span different areas of Jewish cuisine, like I mentioned, across the diaspora, and celebrate foods that were already vegetarian, but also ones that really lend themselves to becoming vegetarian. So, for example, I have a vegan matzo ball soup in there, and then I also just have a vegetarian matzo ball soup in there. Again, it's not all vegan. It's 80% vegan or vegan modifiable, because everyone can make their own choices, and cheese is delicious if you are well equipped with lactate pills. And so some of my favorite recipes in there that we had talked about doing today was a halva babka roll with pistachios. That's one of my favorites. Again, it's more of a project-based recipe, but it is so fabulous. One that I make all the time is a smashed cucumber salad. That's inspired by my Zeta, my grandfather's pickle recipe. It was Zeta's pickles, but it was really just like a quick salad of cucumber, dill, sugar, vinegar, and garlic. So I've made it a little bit more modern by using smashed cucumbers, and that's something that I do make every week. And I don't just say that because it's my book, but I still make it every week. And then another favorite is one that just highlights vegetables being delicious, and that's a red wine braised beets with a creamy mamaliga. So mamaliga is the Romanian polenta, and I make it creamy with tahini and nutritional yeast. So it's a vegan dish. And then it just highlights how beautiful veggies can be with the beets. And coming from Canada also, I only realized this last week that so many of the recipes are filled with beets, because you can always find a beet in the middle of Canada. And we ate beets a lot as kids and growing up. And I think that they're just such a nice substitute and addition to a main dish as well.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we've given it enough time to kind of do its thing. So let's go ahead and take a peek under the lid and just give a peek on this side.
Hopefully. Is it melted?
Is it melted? That is a good question. It is hot. So.
It's hot. Luckily, you and I both probably have little leather padded fingers at this point, so
okay.
we don't feel that. Don't do that at home.
So we're going to place this right on the cutting board. We're going to give it a couple of cuts there. Yeah. And then I think the last thing that we want to do is just give this a bite and try that out, right?
That's we used vegan cheese up here. Not quite melted.
Not quite melted.
That's okay.
All right.
We'll still eat it. Well, cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah.
All right. Here's to the Reuben.
Well, I'm biased. I wrote the recipe.
I know.
But
that's a phenomenal flavor. Mm-hmm. So well characterized by
spicy sauce.
The spicy sauce, yeah.
Yeah.
That's our Russian dressing.
Yeah, it's a spicy Russian dressing.
This is amazing. So I'm going to go ahead and steal this, and I'm
Please
sorry
do.
for that.
Yeah.
But we're going to go ahead and invite Hannah back up here, and we're going to finish up with a couple of more questions for you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff.
I'm just going to actually remove this.
Oh, okay.
But thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. The lucky folks in the room will get to try the spicy Russian dressing in just a few minutes.
I was very heavy-handed with the spicy.
I'm here for it. I'm on the spicy side, not medium, as you've said. Okay, so opening it up to Q&A for folks in the room who may have questions. I also have many I didn't get to, but I will pause and curious if there's anyone who has questions for Micah in the room. Yes, let us just run you a mic really quick so we hear it on the live stream. The mic is behind me. Hold, please. The wonders of live events.
When you're baking vegetables like the celeriac, how do you know that they're ready?
How do I know when they're ready? That's a great question. So they're ready when you can stick a fork in relatively easily and it will come out smoothly. You don't have to yank it out. So as long as a fork or like a paring knife will get in and out relatively smoothly, then it's done. Mm-hmm. Fork tender.
And that's true for other vegetables too?
I would say that's a pretty good rule of thumb, depending on how you want your vegetable to be cooked. Everyone will have preferences, but for something like this, you definitely want it to be in and out. So when I'm making like roasted carrots or roasted cabbage even, as long as a fork or knife can go in and out easily, then it's ready.
So first I want to say that I love celery root and I feel like people don't eat it enough, so I'm really, really excited to try a new version of celeriac. Thank you. But I have a question about liquid smoke. I'm always kind of hesitant. I just feel like it must not be healthy just because it sounds fake, one, and two, like smoke may not necessarily be healthy if you like just ingest it. So I'd love to hear a little more your perspective on that.
Yeah, so liquid smoke is a natural flavoring. It's like made by like actually smoking and distilling that. The only thing with liquid smoke is oftentimes they'll contain caramel color. So if you're wary about that, look for one that doesn't contain caramel color. And I'm very much of the thought of were you not using a lot? And so in the grand scheme of things, it won't really make a huge difference. But if we're unsure, you can use smoked paprika. It will just change the color and it won't be quite as smoky. So for one of the I have a cocktail chapter in the book and one of them is a horseradish Bloody Mary. And it uses like a dash of liquid smoke, which is about, I think like a half milliliter. So it's kind of, in my mind, it's cost of doing business for some of the recipes. But if you're not sure, then a smoked paprika, a high quality smoked paprika, I wouldn't necessarily use the one that's been in your cupboard for 4 years. When it comes to that, there's some really nice ones. So I think it's a really personal preference, but it is a natural product, whatever that means these days. And I think we're doing more good than bad when we're using it as a way to eat more vegetables. So you got to take your wins where you can get them, is my professional opinion. Personal/professional. Yeah.
So thank you. I loved hearing the stories about you cooking with your grandparents and just all your memories. What to you is the most important part of that? And also what tips do you have for instilling the love of cooking into the next generation?
That's a great question. So what tips, and then what was the first part of your question? Can you repeat that?
What was the most important
part? I think the most important part for me was just hearing their stories, because so many of the dishes that I made with my grandmother, for example, one of the dishes is kreplach, and kreplach are like little soup dumplings, and she would make them every year for the Jewish New Year, usually with like leftover chicken or brisket. Then we got her to start making them with just potato for me, and she would tell me how her mother, who fled Ukraine to Canada in the early 1900s, would make them every high holidays as well. And then when they no longer lived in the same place, she'd put her kreplach on a bus and the bus drivers knew her and they would drive the kreplach to the next destination. So having those memories and stories were so important. Then also building those, like when I first had my now husband meet my grandparents. So he came to Calgary to visit, to meet my family. The first thing we did with my grandmother was we made kreplach together. And it was the first time that they had met, and it was really special. And that's when she passed. That's how I honored her, was I made kreplach by myself. And so I think just having the ability to learn their stories is so important, because so much of Jewish culture is told through food. And then when it comes to passing it down, I hope, we'll see, my baby's 6 months old, so I hope he's like the most fabulous cook ever when he's older. But I think, again, just sharing that time together and having it as a bonding experience is important. And I think at the same time, I wrote the book right before I submitted my manuscript. Then a week later, I got pregnant. And I think it carried a new meaning at that point, because then I realized I had something tangible to give to my unborn child, which sounds so weird, but to the next generation, I had something. And that was also a reason why I wanted to write this book, because just because I don't eat meat doesn't mean that those traditions should stop with my nuclear family. They should still keep going. And I think to make them keep going, we have to be open to adapting and changing. And whether that means we're using different ingredients, maybe we're not making an all-day stew for Shabbat because we're all working now, or we're making it out of vegetarian things. I think that being open to change and adapting is what's going to help us carry it forward, because if I had to make everything just how it was before, I'd be a lot less excited and eager to do it. So I think that's how I see it, but I'll let you know in 18 years.
So her advice is you have to write a book for your future children.
Yes. Yeah. Or buy the book and gift it to everyone you know. Yeah,
I like that.
The real answer. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much for doing this, first of all. I thought it was such a creative recipe and something I really haven't seen before. So I'm curious, in the book, what other recipes are in there, what your favorites are.
So I have many favorites because they're all my children. But one of them I would say is my pulled mushroom and tofu brisket. The brisket marinade is modeled after my grandmother's brisket marinade. And it's, first of all, it's high in protein because of the mushrooms and the tofu. So you can check that box off. But it's just a really fun recipe that's full of flavor, and it's a really rich flavor as well. So I'll make that one for holidays. And then another one that I really enjoy is my tofu schnitzel. And before you stick your nose up to tofu, you brine it in pickle juice, because everything should be brined in pickle juice. And that gives it a little bit more of a savory flavor, and also removes some of the liquid from the tofu to make it a little bit firmer. So those are two of my favorites. The smashed cucumber salad and the mamaliga I mentioned are my favorites. And it's hard to choose. But then another one is that I make mini Montreal style bagels. Of course, as a Canadian, I must preserve the Montreal style bagel. And so I'll make those as well. So there's so many, and a lot of it's inspired by the foods I grew up with, but also from travel. My husband's family is Turkish. My parents lived in Israel, and my mom worked in a kitchen on a kibbutz before I was born. So a lot of the food I grew up with wasn't necessarily a North American Jewish food. And so it's fun to be able to develop and cook the recipes where it doesn't feel like I'm eating at a deli every day, except for it right now, obviously.
We picked the most deli recipe of the bunch.
Yeah.
Any other questions in the room? All right.
So like you said, a lot of like the notable Jewish foods are meat-heavy dishes, and you're having to not only make a delicious dish, but carry those memories forward. So what did you find was one of the most challenging ones to adapt?
So I think the most challenging one was the vegan matzo ball. Of course, matzo balls are vegetarian as long as you don't use schmaltz or chicken fat. But with the vegan one, it took me about 25 tries to do it. And I didn't waste any of the food that I tested with. So we ate everything and we felt terrible, because if you experience Passover, you don't feel that great afterwards. And it took me 25 tries to realize that you could steam a matzo ball instead of boil it. So I think that some of these textural issues, especially surrounding Passover and vegan Passover dishes, were really challenging. There were a few dishes that I really wanted to have in there. Like I really wanted a vegan Passover bun, but they were all just hockey pucks and terrible, and absolutely disgusting. So again, taking some of that humble pie and being able to know when to quit was important.
The meat lovers rejoice at that comment, that there were just some that
There are just some that weren't working out. And again, the goal with the cookbook is that someone at home can make it. So if it was causing me grief, it wasn't meant to be. And sometimes you just have to know when to fold in the towel, do something with the towel, whatever the term is, I don't remember. But I think that the meatier the dish, the more fun it was to try to recreate, especially when avoiding fake vegan meats. I think that it posed a really fun challenge, and that's why I do this for a living, because I think it's exciting and I think it's fun, and it's a different way to problem solve. And the vegan matzo balls, they're good now, but I remember my mom was in town while I was doing them, and we got it, and we just were lying on the kitchen floor crying afterwards with joy. It's very exciting. I wish I was kidding, but we were bawling. We were so excited.
What a treat, what a delight. Thanks for being here, Micah.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay, so I'm going home with this book, when you bought the book, and you are brand new to cooking, like don't know how to do anything and don't have time. And another ask for a list is like, smashed cucumber salad sounded approachable and somewhat
Totally.
Quick. Like, can you give us the
Other approachable
you
quicks?
would recommend that somebody like me start?
Yeah. So first of all, you have my number. You can text me. And second of all, I would start with any of the salads. So the smashed cucumber, I have a pomegranate lentil tabbouleh. Very easy. Buy your pomegranates in a little jar. You don't even have to do it yourself. That, and then the Moroccan chickpea carrot salad is very good for meal prep, and you can make it in advance. Very simple. And then the soups. I would say if you're unsure about cooking, and especially vegetarian food, soups are pretty foolproof, because you just have to put it in a pot and walk away. Not too far, but you can walk away, go back once in a while. Don't burn your house on fire. But I would say the soups and the salads are probably your best bet. And then I can always help problem solve. So those are the easiest. Mm-hmm.
Hi, thanks again for this talk. Really, really fun. On a similar vein, I'm also someone new to cooking, and I find the recipe book to be great, but also to be like, I guess I'm curious how you get into being inventive with cooking and taking something that you have that you like and becoming like exploring and not follow the rules so much.
I think when it comes to that, I also see recipe books as a guide. So you can follow it, I say 80%, and then have a little fun, the extra 20%. If you go anything less, don't write that in a review, because it hurts me. It hurts me personally. And don't get too crazy. But I think having a general understanding of what flavors might or might not go together. So for example, when my husband cooks for me for the first time, he substituted curry powder with cinnamon and oregano when he wanted to make me curry, and I've never let him live it down. That was 10 years ago. Never forget. So I think having a general understanding of flavors that work well together and what you can play around with is important. I think probably Chef Randy has classes here that you can come do in this facility. So do that. And just start kind of slow. So in a way that if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. So maybe that means substituting one vegetable for another, or using a different spice blend on something you're already comfortable with, and getting that confidence level up. And again, letting yourself see recipes as a guide. So if you're going to make this one, for example, and you say, I don't want to use celeriac, but I want to use tofu, that's one thing. And if tofu feels freaky, don't even try. Just try that later down the line. But just being gentle with yourself and knowing that not everyone, you're not alone in it. And again, message me.
Y'all can be accountability partners for one another. We can start a
accountability. Yeah, and the spices, I think, just knowing what goes in what family is the biggest.
And making sure they're not expired.
Expired.
Yes. Okay, we have limited time left, so I want to ask my final question, which is just kind of what's next for you? Where can we find this beautiful book? What should we take away?
So with the book, first of all, find it wherever books are sold, preferably your independent bookstores, of course, but it's also on Amazon. And if you're in the Bay, Omnivore Books has it, as does Books Inc. and Books Passage and many Barnes & Noble stores. Barnes & Noble? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't know,
Sounds right.
plural. But what you can take away is, if you're not vegetarian, you don't have to be. Use it as a book of side dishes. I really don't care. If you are not Jewish, that's okay too. It's just another diverse cookbook to add to your shelf, and exploring Jewish food as another ethnic cuisine that you might be interested in is important. And I also tried to make it as user-friendly. So if there's a holiday that a dish is specific to, it has a little blurb about that and what you might expect from that holiday as well. And of course, wherever you buy it, please leave a review, because those also help the author. And my husband told me to plug reviews, so I'm watching you all. Reviews. So
Amazing.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. This has been truly way more fun. I was so nervous, and it's been really fun. Thank you to Micah. Thank you to the great questions you asked in the audience, and to those watching on the live stream. And hopefully we'll see you at another Toxic Google event soon. So thanks so much.
Thank you.